The opening words are from a letter written by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. from the Birmingham City Jail. My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I'm sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. I am sure that none of you would want to rest content with the superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Okay, I'm going to read a second reading, another excerpt from Dr. King's letter. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively, in the knowledge that the time is always ripe to do the right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative song of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You're quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. The purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. I therefore concur with you in your call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in a tragic effort to live in monologue rather than dialogue. The title of my sermon is Civility versus Complicity, but I wanted to change the name to Civility versus Complicity, or What Would Jesus Do? I would like to start by reminding everyone that our church has a policy that invited speakers are free to freely express their opinions, which I will be doing. I know that there are many differing views and strong feelings regarding Jesus of Nazareth, especially at this time of the year. If any of my remarks are perceived as being offensive, I would like to emphasize that offense is not my intention. I have become very interested in the early Christians and in their changing beliefs in the first century CE of the Common Era. And some of my remarks reflect that research and often contradict mainstream beliefs of modern Christians. In a couple of days, a little over 2 billion humans will be celebrating the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. Christians are taught to emulate his example in their daily lives. So I thought it might be worthwhile to consider the context of his life and whether such emulation would be a good thing for us, whether we are Christian or not. Let's say you and your spouse have a small construction business and you have a son who lives at home and helps out with the business when you can pull him away from his online games. So he turns 30 and you tell him that it is time to move out because you're tired of him living in your basement rent-free. You give him a month to come up with a plan. So a few weeks go by and you ask him what he has come up with. He says he has been very busy working on a viable plan. He has decided to be a faith healer and travel. You are a bit surprised and ask him how he plans to support himself. He replies that he has befriended a few older wealthy women who have agreed to support his journey, paying for food, lodging, and other expenses. In fact, he plans to take along a few of his best unemployed buddies for moral support, and the ladies have agreed to pay their way as well. Now you are really shocked and tell him he is using these women and he ought to find a better way to live his life, and this is not the way he was taught. He replies that he is emulating Jesus. Could he have a point? We do not know today how much of the gospel narratives are true accounts of the life of Jesus. However, those who propose that we emulate him do so based on those accounts, so I will refer to those stories in the following descriptions. The early followers of Jesus that formed a commune-like Jewish sect clearly did not believe in the idea of a virgin birth, the resurrection, the divinity of Jesus, or the idea that Jesus died for our sins. These ideas were added a generation later, toward the end of the first century, as a way to entice Gentiles to join the movement. So as best we know, Jesus was a Jew living in a small town called Nazareth, apparently in a fairly large family with 4 brothers, James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon, and an unknown number of sisters, and unnamed. His father was a carpenter named Joseph, and his mother was a young woman named Mary. They were common folk eking out a living. Participation in a census went against Jewish law, yet Jesus' father, Joseph, succumbed to this order with a pregnant fiancée. Was he complicit? None of the Gospels directly outline how Jesus supported his travels. Most of us probably never gave it much thought. I certainly didn't. However, there is an interesting passage in Mark that introduces us to several women who ministered to Jesus while he traveled from place to place. We know that the original 5 disciples were Peter, James and John, Andrew, and Levi. Of the 5, all but Andrew were either rich or were well connected to the wealthy class in Capernaum, related to the fishing trade. James and John, their father, Zebedee, had a prosperous fishing business, including hired hands and boats. And Levi collected the taxes on the fish. Peter's wife, Peter was not rich. He didn't have his own boat. He was a fisherman, but his wife came from money. And her mother owned a house in Capernaum, which was one of Jesus' bases of operations. So it was Levi, Zebedee's wife, Peter's mother-in-law, and apparently other wealthy women who supported the movement. So the 30-year-old, off on his travels, may have been accurate to say he was emulating Jesus. Nazareth was part of Palestine, which was occupied by the Roman Empire. The Jews had their own king, Herod, who was a collaborator with the Roman occupiers. The Romans helped him with finances, and his job was to keep his people from rebelling. Herod was civil toward Rome, but he also wanted to hold on to power over his own people. He was clearly complicit in the ongoing Roman oppression of his own people. Jesus had a cousin called John the Baptist. John was not civil. He was a smelly, wild man living in the wilderness who confronted his own king, telling him who he should or should not marry. This sort of behavior resulted in him being sent to prison and eventually beheaded. Jesus did not make that mistake and avoided any direct confrontation with the king, nor did he advocate armed rebellion against Rome. In fact, he was careful to refrain from any form of resistance against his Roman oppressors. So in that sense, he practiced civility. On the other hand, he was not respectful or civil to the religious leaders of his own religion. He routinely disobeyed Mosaic law by refusing to follow kosher prescriptions around eating and by refusing to follow Sabbath rules. As a good Jew, he did participate in Jewish rituals, such as Passover. However, he did not do so with his family. The Gospel of Mark reports that his family thought he was crazy and demanded to see him. He rejected them, going so far as to disown them, saying that his friends were his true family. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus spoke to the religious leaders of his faith as follows. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Snakes and sons of snakes, how do you expect to escape from being condemned to hell? Unquote. This is not by any stretch of the imagination civil talk. He also went into the most sacred space of his religion, the temple, and in a fit of anger, overturned the tables of the money changers and drove out the animals with a whip. And he didn't do it as a way to free the animals. He was no PETA follower. There was another scene where he got angry at a fig tree because he was hungry and it bore no fruit. So he cursed it and it withered away. So he was no tree hugger either. According to the Gospel of Luke, Jesus went into his hometown Nazareth's synagogue and started preaching. He quoted scripture in a confrontational way, reminding them of times when the Lord favored Samaria or Syria over Israel. Those present probably felt he was taking certain texts from Isaiah out of context. At any rate, they became so angry that they literally dragged him out of town, took him to the top of a hill with the intention of throwing him off the cliff. Somehow he escaped. There are also many accounts of Jesus being kind and compassionate to those who were sick or mentally ill, considered to be demon-possessed. And he had a strong healing ministry, which resulted in him having a large following. It appeared, however, that most of those who followed him did so in hopes of being cured of this or that ailment, and there were many diseases going around in those days without antibiotics or vaccines. He was not civil nor compassionate to his chosen apostles. For example, he often talked in riddles and parables, and frequently chastised them for not understanding what he was saying. In the few fragments of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene that have survived, she claims that he secretly told her many secret truths, but denied his other followers the same secrets. He was once in a boat with them when a storm came, and he criticized them for being afraid of drowning. If we decide to emulate Jesus, do we emulate his civility to his Roman oppressors, or do we emulate his incivility to his religious leaders? Do we emulate his compassion toward the sick and mentally ill, or do we emulate his disrespectful attitude toward his own family and his followers? Do we emulate his wise teachings to the crowds, or do we emulate his anger toward the money changers and the fig trees? Do we emulate his tendency to reach out to the poor and those who were rejected by society, or do we emulate his refusal to get a job and instead accept financial support from the wealthy class? I do not know the answer to these questions, except to say that he was a human being like us. He probably avoided direct confrontation with the Romans because he did not want to get killed before he could do some good in the world. He probably avoided a direct confrontation with his king because he didn't want to get beheaded like his cousin John. Was he complicit? In my view, no. He chose his battles. He did not reject his Jewish heritage, but was first and foremost a reformer. He saw the struggles of his people, trying unsuccessfully to obey the many complicated laws and restrictions of Jewish law, and wanted to ease those restrictions. To do so, he felt it necessary to be confrontational with his own religious leaders. He could have been civil with those leaders, but he found their teachings abhorrent and diametrically in opposition to his mystical spiritual message. To be civil to them would have meant complicity to those teachings, and he could not do that. What can we do in these times? What must we do in these times? If we decide to practice civility, isn't there a danger that we will become complicit? Do we end up being, in Dr. King's words, quote, more devoted to order than to justice, and preferring a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, unquote? Representative Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, said the following: let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if you see anybody from that cabinet, speaking of Trump's cabinet, in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gas station, you get out and you create a crowd, and you push back on them, and you tell them they're not welcome anywhere. We've got to get the children connected to their parents. We don't know what damage has been done to these children. All that we know is that they're in cages, they're in prisons, they're in jails. I don't care what they call it, that's where they are. And Mr. President, we will see you every day, every hour of the day, everywhere that we are, to let you know you cannot get away with this, unquote. It is impossible to take seriously any Republican who demands civility from Democrats or from the left when they say nothing to the president, whose rhetoric is the worst bullying, xenophobic, racist, name-calling, misogynist vitriol possible. However, prominent Democrats criticize Maxine Waters as well, including Nancy Pelosi. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer criticized her as follows, quote, "We all have to remember to treat our fellow Americans, all of our fellow Americans, with the kind of civility and respect we expect will be afforded to us. No one should call for the harassment of political opponents. That's not right. That's not American," unquote. Senator Schumer was correct in that Representative Waters was not being civil. After the Kavanaugh hearings, Anna Marie Arkilla and Maria Gallagher confronted Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona in an elevator on Friday, September 28, 2018. Ms. Arkilla indicated that she had planned to speak nicely to him, but as she started talking, she became angry. At one point, she told him, quote, "Look at me when I am talking to you. You are telling me that my assault doesn't matter," unquote. She stopped being civil at that moment, but she was speaking truth to power. Reverend King was frequently criticized for being uncivil and a rabble-rouser. He made white people uncomfortable when he marched in their neighborhoods. They saw him as uncivil. After Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, Roland Evans and Robert Novak, well-respected conservative journalists of the time, penned a column calling for, quote, "civility and tolerance to be restored to America." They state, quote, "The dissenters, particularly the Negro poor and the war protesters, turned to direct action in most uncivil disobedience." Today, the conservatives of our time with short memories pretend that they liked what Dr. King did and call him a hero. Those who criticized King were right in that civil disobedience is uncivil behavior. When Dr. King organized protests, he was being uncivil. After the Long March, when Mahatma Gandhi set his cup in the bay with the intention of making salt, he was committing civil disobedience. He was breaking the law and encouraging others to do the same. He was being uncivil. The police were in a position of power, and Dr. King was in a subjugated position. The British Army was in a position of power, and Gandhi was in a subjugated position. Dr. Ford was in a subjugated position, and the Republican senators did everything they could to keep her there and to elevate Judge Kavanaugh to a position of power. This was in spite of his uncivil behavior at the hearing and of Dr. Ford's civil demeanor. A scientist recently in China used a gene editing program called CRISPR to edit embryonic genes to make the resulting babies immune to HIV. His actions have been condemned by scientists worldwide. However, before and during his experiments, he consulted with scientists at Stanford and Rice universities. Apparently those scientists were civil to him, helping him along and not saying anything. Are they not also complicit with his work? Many praise and emulate Mother Teresa and see her as a saint. However, when the Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, declared martial law in 1975, she took away civil rights and incarcerated her opponents for 21 months. Mother Teresa said, quote, "People are happier. There are more jobs. There are no strikes," unquote. She was practicing civility, and in doing so, legitimized the Prime Minister's actions. Does sainthood in the Catholic Church require civility in the face of oppression, or was her civility a form of complicity? What can we do in these times? What must we do in these times? Unlike Jesus of Nazareth, we do not live in a country that is being occupied by a foreign force. He lived in a time of extreme oppression and violence, including a major rebellion that started before his birth and lasted until 70 CE, led by Jewish rebels named Judas of Galilee and Zadok the Pharisee, which resulted in at least 2,000 Jews being crucified. To attempt to prescribe how one ought to act under such circumstances would be the epitome of elitism. So to suggest that we ought to emulate the ways in which Jesus of Nazareth navigated those circumstances, in my opinion, is ridiculous. We live in a country with a representative republic. We have the power to vote who we want to represent us, who to make laws, who to lead us. We are facing global issues that Jesus did not face, such as climate change and overpopulation. Perhaps Maxine Waters is right. When our elected leaders deny these problems even exist and put all the blame for our problems on suffering refugees, when those leaders overturn policies designed to protect the environment and to provide aid to those in need, when those leaders justify the snatching of babies from their mothers' breasts and put them in cages, when those leaders are willing to tear gas children who are seeking asylum, then if we remain silent, are we being complicit? Civility in the presence of oppression is complicity. Is it time to be uncivil? But what about compromise? Now that there will be a divided Congress starting in January, there will need to be some bipartisan efforts if any bills will be passed. I personally do not think that bipartisan compromise necessarily constitutes civil complicity, but where to draw the line is a complicated question. If a legislator agrees to fund Trump's wall in order to get a bill passed that gives the dreamers citizenship, is that complicity or is that sound governance in a divided country? Legislators will be facing many such issues in the days to come. So I've raised a few questions. I have no answers, but I'd be happy to take some thoughts or comments or questions from the group.